Elias Whitfield was 34 years old, and he had never once in his life needed to introduce himself by name. His father was Raymond Whitfield. Whitfield Capital. $17 billion, 4 decades of commercial real estate, a name on 2 hospital wings, and a university library in the city where Elias had grown up. Elias had spent his entire life watching the room change the moment someone made the connection. The way attention sharpened. The way warmth arrived from nowhere. The way people who had been looking past him suddenly found reasons to look directly at him. He had wanted, just once, to be in a room where nobody knew. So he took a job. A real one, floor care technician at the Alderton Tower, a 40-story mixed-use building in the financial district that his father's company had owned for 11 years. He wore the gray uniform. He learned the equipment. He showed up at 6 a.m. and did the work. He told himself he was looking for someone who loved him for what he actually was, not for what his name unlocked. What he found instead broke something open in him that he hadn't known was closed. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The building was still dark in the lower corridors when Elias arrived his first morning. The freight elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and old metal. His supervisor, a man named Curtis Webb, 53, 20 years on the job. The kind of quiet authority that comes from knowing every system in a building personally, handed him a laminated sheet with the daily floor rotation, and said 2 things. The polisher ran hot on the left side, and never cut corners on the marble in the lobby because it showed. Elias said he understood. Curtis looked at him for a moment. The look of a man reading something he couldn't quite place. Then he nodded and went back to the supply room. The Alderton Tower had 1,847 regular occupants across its residential and commercial floors. Elias had asked his father's property manager, in a conversation he had sworn the man to confidentiality about, for a floor assignment on the residential side. He had been given floors 22 through 27. 6 floors. 44 units. People who lived above the lobby's sightline and below the penthouse tier. Professionals in their 30s and 40s who had earned their way to a certain altitude and were still climbing. He had told himself the plan was simple. He would observe. He would meet people as a cleaner. He would see who they were when the name wasn't in the room. And then, eventually, if someone was worth knowing, he would find a way to know them correctly. He had not expected it to take 3 days to understand that the plan was the wrong one. He had also not expected Delia Price. She was on the 24th floor. Unit 24C. He first encountered her on his 3rd morning at 6:47 a.m. when she came out of her apartment moving too fast for the hour, a thermos in one hand and a folder of papers in the other, and nearly walked into the cleaning cart he had parked in the hallway while buffing the corridor floor. She stopped. She looked at the cart. She looked at him. "I'm so sorry," she said, and she meant it. Not the performative apology people gave when they wanted to move on quickly, but the kind that came from actually seeing the inconvenience she'd almost caused. "That was entirely me. I never look up in the morning." "It's all right," he said. She looked at the cart again, then at the floor he'd been working on. "You do this floor every morning? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Then I should probably learn to look up on those days." She said it without arch, without performance. A practical observation. She shifted the folder under her arm. "Have a good morning." She went. He watched the elevator doors close behind her. He buffed the same section of floor for 4 minutes after she was gone, without being aware he was doing it. He had spent the previous 6 months being introduced to women. His mother, Lorraine Whitfield, had orchestrated most of it. Charity dinners, gallery openings. The kind of social architecture designed to create proximity between eligible people who had been pre-screened by net worth and family name. She had done this with what she described as love, and what Elias recognized as precision. She was not wrong that he needed to find someone. She was wrong about where and how the finding would happen. The women he had met in those 6 months were not bad people. Most of them were intelligent. Several were accomplished in their own right, with careers and opinions and lives that had substance. But there was always a moment, he had started watching for it, when the weight of who he was shifted the dynamic. Sometimes it happened in the first conversation. Sometimes it took longer. But it always came, the slight recalibration, the subtle realignment, the way a person's attention moved from him to what he represented. He had learned to recognize it the way you recognize a load-bearing wall from the wrong side, not by what it showed, but by the way everything around it arranged itself. He did not blame them. The money was real. The life it unlocked was real. He understood why it mattered. He just wanted once to meet someone for whom it hadn't entered the equation yet. His father had thought the idea was impractical. His father was a man who solved problems with structure and capital, and a son with false employment at his own company struck him as a structural inefficiency. They had argued about it mildly, the way men who respect each other argue, without resolution, but without damage. Raymond Whitfield had eventually said, "Do what you need to do. Be careful, and don't let Curtis Webb figure it out." Curtis Webb had figured it out by the end of the first week. He had said nothing. Elias respected him enormously for that. The 24th floor had 12 units. In 3 weeks, Elias had a working picture of most of them. There was the couple in 24A who argued every Thursday evening and reconciled every Friday morning with the specific pattern of people who loved each other imperfectly and knew it. The woman in 24F who kept a bicycle in her entryway and left before dawn on weekends. The man in 24J who played the piano, not for performance, but because some people process the day that way. Elias knew these things the way you know things when you're the person maintaining the space around people's lives, not intrusively, but accurately. Delia Price was 32 years old and worked in public defense. He had learned this from a case folder she left on the hallway floor once, just for a moment, while she dug in her bag for her keys, not snooping, just present. He had carried the image of the folder's cover notation for the rest of that shift. She worked long hours. She came home at unusual times, 9 p.m. on some nights, 6 p.m. on others, occasionally not until after he had finished the floor for the evening. She said good morning when she saw him, and meant it. She had once held the supply closet door open for him when his arms were full, with the automatic consideration of someone who noticed when someone else needed a hand. She did not perform these courtesies. She didn't seem aware they were courtesies at all. He had asked Curtis, obliquely, about the residents on 24. Curtis had offered 2 words about each of them. The way a man characterizes people he has known for years and finds accurate summaries sufficient. About Delia, he had said, works too hard, doesn't complain. In Curtis's vocabulary, that was a significant endorsement. What broke Elias open, what he had not been prepared for, was not Delia. Or not only Delia. It was the Thursday of his 4th week, on the 23rd floor. He had been finishing the corridor near 23D when he heard it. Voices, low, from the stairwell landing just off the east corridor. He had not been eavesdropping. He was within 10 feet of the door because his rotation took him there, and the door was propped open with a fire extinguisher because the ventilation on that floor ran warm. There were 2 women. He recognized one of the voices, Portia Gale, 23D, event planner, had smiled at him every time she passed, and had twice asked his name. The second woman he placed as her friend, he had seen her in the lobby once, visiting. "He seems sweet," the friend said. The cleaner, Portia's voice, a tone he hadn't heard from her before. "He's good-looking, for that. For that? You know what I mean." A brief silence. "You should see the guy in 24C's building. Finance. She doesn't even notice him. Delia wouldn't notice anyone who made under 200,000. Laughter, brief, not cruel. The laugh of people who have said something they know is partially wrong and don't care enough to correct. The door moved slightly in a draft, and the voices dimmed, and then there was just the sound of the corridor. He stood with his hand on the polisher and let the words arrange themselves into something he could look at directly. The first thing he felt was not what he expected. He had been braced, entering the experiment, for the version of this that confirmed his fears. Women who were drawn to the name, the money, the proximity to a particular kind of life. He had encountered that version, mildly, in the 6 weeks prior. Small moments, brief recalibrations. The specific kind of attention that arrives when someone spots a resource and begins to assess it. He had noted them and moved on. What he felt standing in that corridor was something different. It was closer to grief than anger. Not because of Portia, whose column he had now fully resolved, but because of the sentence that had landed beside her name without permission. He knew, rationally, that one overheard sentence in a stairwell was not a character portrait. He knew who delivered it, and what she knew, and what she didn't. He knew that the woman in 24C who had apologized to his cart, who held doors without thinking, who worked hours that most people would have complained about and didn't, that woman was not made or unmade by a second-hand description from a neighbor who found her unknowable. He also knew that there was only one way to find out, not by staying in the gray uniform, not by watching from a careful distance, by being the plainest version of himself he could offer, and seeing what she did with it. He stood there for a long moment. He finished the floor. He thought about it all the way home, not anxiously. The way he thought about things that mattered, carefully, from multiple angles, looking for where the lines connected. He did not move fast. That was not because the thing he'd heard required strategy. It required thought. He had been operating on a theory that getting to know someone without the name in the room would show him who they actually were. What he had not accounted for was the possibility that what he found would be more complicated than a simple reveal. He had heard a second-hand sentence about a woman delivered by someone who didn't know her particularly well, in a conversation she was never meant to be part of, by a person who had her own reasons for saying what she said. That was not evidence. He knew the difference between evidence and noise. He also knew what he had watched on the 24th floor for 4 weeks. He thought about the folder she held, and the hours she kept, and the way Curtis described her. He thought about the morning she'd apologized to his cart. He thought about the door she held open. He thought about the fact that he had, in 4 weeks, not once seen in her the thing he had been watching for: the recalibration, the realignment, the weight of money shifting a room. She didn't know who he was. And who she was without knowing was the version of her that was actually true. He made one decision. He would have one honest conversation, as himself. Not as Elias the floor technician, and not as Elias Whitfield of Whitfield Capital, just as the man he actually was, in the plainest version of himself he could offer. And then he would tell her the truth. All of it, and whatever she did with it would tell him everything he still needed to know. He gave Curtis 2 weeks' notice the following Monday, Curtis shook his hand and said he'd been a decent worker and that the left side of the polisher still ran hot. Elias said he knew. He thanked him for not saying anything. Curtis said he figured it wasn't his business what a man needed to do to figure something out. He went back on a Saturday morning. Not in the gray uniform, in jeans and a plain jacket, the way he looked when he wasn't anything in particular. He stood in the lobby and he was aware, for the last time, of what it felt like to be in this building without the name. He had asked the property manager for one thing, Delia Price's unit number. He already knew it. He had asked because doing it formally, through the correct channel, felt like the right way to begin doing everything correctly. He rode the elevator to 24. He walked down the corridor he had buffed every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 6 weeks. He knocked on the door of 24C. She answered in 12 seconds. She was in weekend clothes, coffee in hand, and she looked at him with the expression of a person who recognized a face from a context she couldn't immediately place. Then she placed it. "You're the," she started. "I was," he said. "I'm not anymore. My name is Elias Whitfield. The building belongs to my family's company. I've been working here for the past 6 weeks, and I'd like to explain why. If you're willing to hear it, and then I'd like to ask if you'd have coffee with me." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. "You should probably come in," she said. He told her everything, not strategically, not in the version of himself he showed in conference rooms or at his mother's dinners. He told her about the 6 months of introductions and the recalibration he kept watching for, and the theory he'd had about what a gray uniform might reveal. He told her about Curtis's 2 words and the morning of the cart and the conversation he had not meant to hear. He told her that last part carefully. He told her what was said and who said it, and that he did not believe it was a true picture of her, and that it wasn't why he was at her door. He was at her door because of everything else. She listened. She did not interrupt. She held her coffee mug with both hands, and she listened the way she did everything, with the full weight of her attention, without performance. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "The sentence they said about me," she said. "The one about income. Yes, that's not who I am. I know. How do you know? You've seen me in a hallway 6 times. 8, he said. And I know because I've been watching for a specific thing for 6 months and I never once saw it in you." She looked at her coffee. She looked at him. "That's a strange way to meet someone," she said. "I'm aware of that." Another silence. Longer, he did not fill it. "The coffee I have is from a gas station," she said. "I haven't been to the store this week. If you want to go somewhere that has better coffee, I wouldn't object to that." He said that sounded right to him. It did not happen all at once after that. It rarely did. It happened the way things built correctly tend to happen, in sequence, with each piece placed before the next, without rushing the structure. There were 4 months of the kind of learning that required being in the same room with someone over time. Her precision and her hours, and the way she argued cases through out loud when she was stuck, which he found out about on a Tuesday evening that ran unexpectedly late. His habit of arriving early to everything, which she teased him about in the specific way people tease someone for a trait they've privately decided they like. He told his mother. Lorraine Whitfield had asked 2 questions. Was she a good person? And was she good to him? He answered both. His mother had said, "Then bring her to dinner." The dinner was, by his mother's standards, restrained. Delia had worn something simple and sat at the table and talked to his father about infrastructure finance, with the composed certainty of someone who was not performing. Raymond Whitfield had looked at his son once, across the table, with the expression of a man who was revising an earlier assessment. On the drive home, Delia said, "Your father tested me. He tests everyone. I know. I've read about him. A pause. I've also read about you. The hospital wing. The graduate fellowships. He looked at the road. How long have you known? Since week 2, she said. Curtis told me. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the road, but the corner of her mouth had done something he recognized by then. He looked back at the windshield. Curtis told you. He said, the new floor tech on 22 through 27 is not a floor tech. He wanted me to know so I could make my own decision about what to do with it. Elias drove for a moment. What did you decide? To watch, she said. Same as you. He thought about that for the rest of the drive. He thought about Curtis Webb, who had figured it out in the first week and said nothing to him, and said exactly the right thing to her. He thought about what it meant that she had known and stayed exactly herself. Not because she was indifferent to what he was, because she was more interested in what he was doing and why. That was what he had been looking for. He just hadn't known that was the form it would come in. On an evening in late spring, 14 months after the morning of the cart and the thermos and the folder full of cases, Elias Whitfield sat on the small balcony of apartment 24C. His name was not yet on the lease, though that conversation was close, and listened to the city settle. Inside, he could hear Delia on the phone. A client. Her voice was measured and specific in the way it always was when she was working. She had taken on a case the previous month that required hours she gave without complaining and outcomes she couldn't guarantee, because that was the nature of the work, and she had chosen it knowing that. He thought about the gray uniform folded in a bag in his closet at his own apartment 2 miles away. He had kept it. Not as a trophy. As a reminder of the thing he had learned in 6 weeks of quiet and clean corridors and early mornings, that what a person is when they don't know who you are is the most accurate thing about them. Everything else is a response to information. He heard Delia end the call. He heard her come to the balcony doorway. It's cold, she said. I know. She went back inside and returned with his jacket and his coffee, in that order. She sat in the other chair. She pulled her knees up. The city was a soft light and a low sound, and everything that needed to be said for the moment had already been said. He put on his jacket. He picked up his coffee. He was exactly where he needed to be. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.